Hey everyone, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2017 Ford F-150 Raptor, we're going to be showing you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs for the rear axle. But before we get into that, let's take a minute, we'll check these out and make sure they're going to work for you. Underneath the truck, this is what the airbags are going to look like installed. And more or less, they're just going to take the place of the factory jounce bumper, which is this part here. Now with the jounce bumper, they really don't provide any support. You know, they just prevent the suspension from bottoming out. And so that's how the airbag's going to provide that additional support. It's going to, contact the bottom of the frame rail and the top of your axle tube, putting a big cushion in there, more or less. And when it comes to these Raptors, you know, they have awesome suspension, but they're not really suited for towing in particular, right? This isn't a Super Duty truck. So, having this back here, if you plan on towing and the truck's squatting and the ride isn't that great, an airbag can really help combat those issues by adjusting that pressure, eliminating the squat or sag, and giving the truck some additional support when you need it. You are able to adjust the bags from 5 psi all the way up to 100. That way you can really kind of dial in and fine tune your truck whenever you're hooked up to your trailer or whatever it is that you're pulling. Even if you have a payload in the bed, these can help out, you know. So let's say you have low pressure in it, go pick up your trailer, put some air in the bags and accommodate that, right? That'll really help too with unnecessary wear on your suspension components. These, especially these real high-end ones that are on these trucks to begin with, don't want to have to replace them if you prematurely, for sure. And these are also going to require at least 5 pounds of air minimum at all times, even if you're not hooked up or anything. And that way you don't compromise the bag's integrity. It's just what they recommend. So to make those adjustments easier and on the fly and kind of eliminate that minimum maintenance portion of it, one thing I do recommend getting is an onboard air compressor system. A lot of them will kind of do it for you. You can make quick adjustments, so on and so forth. One of the ones I really like, I'm a big fan of, it's made by Air Lift. It's the Easy Mount Wireless One. Really nice kit. Everything's kind of integrated on one big bracket. Pre-made wiring harness, pretty much. It's wireless, and it's a really good option. So if that's something you're thinking about, that'd be the one I'd recommend checking out. The bags are going to have a 5,000 pound load carrying capacity. That's just the amount of weight that they're going to be able to handle. So it's not going to increase your truck's capacity, right? You can't tow another 5,000 extra pounds for what it's rated for just because you have air springs. So just keep that in mind. But ultimately, it's a really simple component how it works. If you're looking for additional support when you are towing and still want to maintain for the most part your factory ride when you're not, these are the way to go for sure. As far as the installation goes, not gonna lie, definitely time consuming and a lot of steps involved. This is one of those things that I would only say you should probably try to give it a go or try to tackle a job like this if you're pretty familiar or have some experience doing some wrenching. And that's because you do have to remove the factory U-bolts and let the axle come down and do quite a bit of modification, not gonna lie. But, it's one of those things you do it once and then you have the benefit of the springs from there on out, right? With that in mind, if you come to kind of start watching the install, say something you don't want to do, you can't always use our dealer locator network, and that can help you find a shop in your neighborhood that can set something like this up for you. But if you're going to give it a go, hang around, we'll go ahead and get started on them now. To begin our installation, we're going to be working underneath the back of our Raptor. And what I've done is temporarily lowered and removed the spare tire. Just gives you a lot more room to work. And you want to make sure that you have your wheels chalked. And what I've done right now for the time being is just using a jack here to lift up on the frame of our truck, just to help increase the distance or space between the bottom of our frame rail and the top of our axle tube. We need to remove our factory jounce bumper, and we're going to do this on both sides of our truck. Up in this hole, there's a 13 millimeter head bolt. and pull this down and set it to the side, as we will not be reinstalling it. Just over here on our passenger side, we're going to have this little clip that's attached to this bracket, and we need to kind of reposition this wiring. So take a trim tool or a screwdriver or something and pry up on the plastic clip. And all you're going to really need to do I'll just remove this little portion here. I'm just going to kind of do one of these deals, put it this way and zip tie it down. Over here on the driver's side, we're going to have this bracket that's holding in some of these ABS lines or wiring, and we're going to have to modify the bracket, so we need to pop these out. Sometimes it helps too if you spray soapy water on it, just to help kind of lubricate them, make it easier to pop out. I'm just using a little trim tool to give me a little bit extra leverage, but we want to make sure that these are going to be well clear. You know, I'll tuck these off to the side in a minute, but we're going to have to cut a portion of this off here. This is a part of the bracket that we're going to need to cut off. It is pretty thick steel. I'm just going to use a hacksaw. You know, you can use a cut-off wheel or whatever you got. Just be real careful. You know, you don't want to hit any lines or anything like that. So take your time with this part. With that cut made, I did come back with a little sandpaper, smooth it out, and then put some paint on it so it don't rust. But you'll just take that ABS line, push it back into place, and then take the other one and zip tie it to it. That'll kind of hold it out of the way, right? And then if you kind of move over to here, we see we have our line, ABS, and our brake line on this bracket. We need to reposition that as well. So we have a 10 millimeter head bolt here. You can pull that out. And then you can grab one of these spacers, a bolt, put on a split lock washer and then a flat washer. And that's gonna go in behind there. You can snug it down with a 13. And you're gonna do this same exact thing on the other side of the truck as well. Over here on our passenger side, we can install the upper plate to the bottom of the frame. You'll do the same thing on the driver's side as well. The brackets are side specific though, so make sure to check the instructions, make sure you got the right one. And if you've been following the instructions along with us, you may notice we're kind of jumping all over the place, and that's because my thought is we can try to get as much as we can done before we have to deal with removing the U-bolts and stuff like that. I figured that would make the most sense. But with that said, for this bracket, this oval-shaped hole is going to line up with the hole that our jounce bumper bolt went into, and then you can take this bolt here and put on a flat washer. We'll get this started by hand. We want to make sure that we push it as far as we can towards the inside of the truck. I have a 6 millimeter Allen key. Snug that down. And then we can use a torque wrench to tighten it down to the amount specified in the instructions. And anything that we do torque, you can find that setting or specification rather in your instruction booklet. At the very end of our axle tube, we're going to have another ABS line fastener, and just take your trim tool, pop that out. We'll do this on each side of our truck. What you do now is take one of these little brackets, and there's a hole on the top of it. They give you this push pin deal that allows you to put a zip tie through it. So I'm going to push that in if I can here. And I kind of run mine at an angle, right? And what this is going to do, it's going to clamp to the axle tube, and eventually, we can pull that line over and zip tie it to it up out of the way. I'm just going to kind of roughly get it where I think it needs to go. I'm going to give you a clamp. Probably be easier just to get this kind of started. So trying to hold that bracket up perfectly. The clamp is it'll hold the bracket down. So I think something about like that should work. Snug this down completely. I'm going to hold off and actually zip tying this for now in case we still need a little bit of movement out of the way or something like that when we continue to work over here. But I'm going to do the same exact thing on the other side of the truck as well. We're going to need to remove our parking brake, a little bracket, and so it's going to be over here on the passenger side, right here in this area on the front side of our axle. Here is the bolt that we can remove. It's a 10mm head. Get rid of that bolt. We're not going to reuse it. Kind of pop the bracket out of there. And then in the kit, you'll receive this bracket. And what you can do is place it like that. All right. And then get this bolt ready. You'll have one of these bolts. Put on a flat washer. Put it through like that, and then on the back side, put another flat washer and the appropriate nylon lock nut. We'll just leave that hand tight for now. And this bracket will go in place. Of the existing one. You can grab another one of these bolts. This time use a split lock washer. We'll just leave this hand tight too, and anything that we end up doing like this where we're leaving it hand tight just to kind of roughly get it into position, just like our ABS wires, we're going to wait to zip tie them. Once everything's wrapped up and whatnot, we'll come back and make sure all these are torqued down. We can start to assemble our air springs now. So on one side of it, there's going to be 3 fittings. We're going to use this one for our air fitting here. So with these, just make sure you get them started straight. Get them as tight as you can by hand. And then come in and give it an additional turn and a half. Before we go any further, what I like to do is just quickly check the airbag itself to make sure it doesn't have any leaks or anything, or it's not defective. That way we don't get everything together and then at the very end realize, you know, we got a defective bag or something silly like that. So with that said, you can take the Airline that they give you, and I just fold it in half, and we'll cut it. Let's do a quick cut here. And when you're cutting Airline, you know, you can use a tubing cutter like this, or there's several other tools, you know, something like this that you can use, or even just take a razor edge, put this on a block of wood, cut it straight. You want to avoid just using your kind of your classic pair of snips, because it'll probably, you know, not give it a clean cut and leak out of there. So cut it in half. I'll take a little bit more off here just to really make sure it's a good cut, which it is. And then the way these work, they're quick connect or push to connect, so you'll push it in, you'll feel it kind of drop in and lock into place there. And what I'm going to do is just throw a little air in this. We're not going to get crazy or anything, just a little bit. And then you can take soapy water, and I'm just going to spray the whole entire bag and check for leaks. And the way you would do that, usually it's pretty obvious. Kind of give it a minute, let it do its thing. And if you see little air bubbles continuously forming and rapidly forming, you know you got a leak. So for example, you know, if it was leaking out of the fitting here, it'd be bubbling up. You could come back and tighten it down a little bit more. That would usually solve it. If the bag is leaking, you know, out of the side or something, you'd have a defective bag. I've done a ton of these. I've yet to come across that, but you never know. It could save you a headache. You know, not a bad idea to do the bottom side too. It's just a just in case type of thing. And, you know, once you get everything together, we can fill it up to the recommended amount, spray all of our fittings, and that's how we're going to check for leaks anyway. But looks like we're good here. I don't see anything. So we'll let the air out. And let's say too, this is a good example why I have it here. Let's say once you do get it all together and you're noticing it leaking where the Airline goes into the fitting, you probably got a bad cut, so you can remove it. If you just kind of put some pressure down on that top of the fitting, you pull the Airline out, you'd cut it clean again and check it again. So I dried our air spring off, and we can continue to assemble. You're going to have one of these roll plates that'll set on top like that. And then you have this upper plate, and this one is the right side or passenger side, just to give you an example there. And they are side specific. On the right side, you'll have to do this. The driver's side, you won't, but you can take a carriage bolt, and what we're going to do is place it into this opening like that. And then what I like to do, so it kind of stays in place better, I'm just going to take a little piece of packing tape. Going to do one of these deals. But then this will go into place, and you know, all the holes will line up there. And then you can take two of these style of screws, get them both started. And you can use, let's see, this is 7/32 Allen head tool here. I'm going to run them down as tight as I can by hand. We'll come back with our torque wrench and get them completely tight. At this point, we're ready to remove our U-bolts and things like that. So just to kind of reiterate, make sure that your truck's wheels are chalked. You know, our stand back here that's contacting the hitch, which is connected to the frame, same difference pretty much, but slightly push that up to kind of relieve the suspension of some of its load. And then I also have another support here on the front of our differential just to keep that supported as well. Now you want to mark these strike plates here, and you want to mark the back side of them. So I just kind of took it a step further over here. I put DR for driver rear, did the same for the passenger side, just so we can keep track of what's what. I also put some marks where our lower plate is that the U-bolts are attaching to, just so we have a reference. You know, if we need it, we got it. If not, no big deal. What we can do, you get a 13/16 socket, and we have these 4 nuts on the bottom of our U-bolt. So go ahead and get these removed. I kind of like to alternate between them too. Then we can go ahead and lift our U-bolts up and out of position. We're going to do this on each side of our truck. So whenever you're doing this, just take your time, you know, check all your corners and everything, make sure nothing looks like it's out of place. I continued to raise the frame of our vehicle, being that we're on a drivewall lift. I really didn't want to get our wheels off the ground. And so there's just so much travel in the suspension. What I ended up doing, getting to a spot where I was comfortable, taking another jack, and it's not really holding anything. It's just kind of transferring the load, if you will, and putting it under the leaf spring. And what's happening, this block is getting a gap in it now where we can get it up high enough to be able to pull this out. So once you have both of them out, what you're going to do, well, you got a couple options really. You can, in the instructions, you can either cut this tab off of the axle tube and then, you know, flip these around and have it set like that. What we did was you're going to take the driver's side, move it to the passenger, take the passenger, move it to the driver's side, but it has to clear that little tab there. And so we just cut a little thing out here to allow us to do that, which we'll do the other one in a minute. I just kind of prepped this one so we can get these parts back in as quickly as possible. But this is just gonna go right back in place there. When you're cutting this, you just need to remove enough material to clear that little tab. You can do this a variety of ways. It actually cuts easier than you would think for how solid it is. I'm just going to use a Sawzall. Use a cutoff wheel, a grinder, combination of all three, whatever you got. Just be sure to use your safety measures while you're doing this type of thing. Got both of our pieces trimmed and everything and set into place, and then put the weight of the truck back down on it, and kind of having a hard time, you know, the base dropped into the bottom just fine, but getting the dowels on the leaf spring to actually sit back into position, it's a little tricky. I've been kind of just working the truck up and down, trying to move things around, and something that I found that helped quite a bit was just loosely putting in place the lower plate. So you want to grab your plate if you're dealing with this. If not, you're gonna have to do it anyway, but take the long carriage bolts, drop them through there, and then these holes here, that's where one of the U-bolts, the new U-bolts, is gonna go through. So that's kind of gonna do one of those deals. Take a U-bolt, Drop that through. Take our lower bracket here. Kit'll come with some new washers and U-bolt nuts. With these two, they're pretty fine thread, so make sure that you get the nut started straight on there. And if one's really wanting to fight you or not want to go on, just try it on another end of a U-bolt. A lot of times it's really all it takes, instead of dealing with it and trying to strip it out or causing other issues. And the other U-bolt, let's go back in the original position. Like I said, a lot of times this will help you get everything lined back up just by having kind of pressure on everything and kind of having an extra hand almost. So it's definitely worth a shot. Like I said, you'll have to do it eventually anyway. So I tried to kind of tighten up our U-bolts a little bit to draw everything in, and it helped a little bit, but it was still really, not really far off, but kind of far off. Ultimately the axle needed to go forward a quarter inch or so, right? And so what I did was just took a strap here, a ratchet strap, hooked one into the frame, looped the other end around the axle tube. And when I cranked on it, it pulled that axle tube forward, getting everything to line up. And then I simply just removed all of our jacks and everything to let the truck sit under its own weight. So once this is all, in the position it needs to be, we can, let the truck sit under its own weight and start to tighten up our U-bolts. So when you do these U-bolts, you want to try to draw everything in evenly. So I'll usually run one nut up a few threads and kind of bounce back and forth here. I'm going to try to get this lined up in its original position too. We'll take this axle strap now, and the carriage bolts will drop through it. And then you'll have these flange nuts. And get started. Just like the U-bolt, you want to kind of tighten these up equally. Get them hand tight, and then with the 9/16, just snug them up a little bit. Now, want to make sure come back with your torque wrench, torque these down, and again, do that crisscross pattern to make sure that you're putting an equal amount of pressure on them. Once you got the U-bolts done, you can come back and get these two flange nuts torqued down. Over on the driver's side, on the front side of the axle, there's a little opening there. You can put that carriage bolt in there if you haven't already, and then they give you this clamp. You put that around the e-brake cable, and then you'll take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut. I'll get that going. Then you come back with the 9/16 and tighten it down. We're ready to get the airbag assemblies in now. So on the bottom portion, make sure to grab the other roll plate and get that lined up. It'll line up with holes in the bottom bracket. And then roughly get it into position. So we already had that carriage bolt in there. I'm just gonna lift it up and put a flange nut on it loosely. Take another carriage bolt and do the same thing on that side. So more or less get it started. You can take the roll plate and the air spring, make sure everything lines up. And what you'll do, you can take this bolt, put on a split lock washer and a flat washer, and you're gonna go up from the bottom and get it started hand tight. So you have this one here and then another one just in front of it. And if it's kind of fighting, one thing you can do, roughly hold it in position. And right now I got the truck jacked up like we did before to increase this distance so we get the bag in. I'll just kind of hold it where it needs to be, lower the jack some, kind of close that gap. Once you get both the bottom ones started hand tight, I let a little more weight down on it so we could try to get the airbag as straight as possible, because you can push it front to back a little bit. Usually you can never get it dead center. It's pretty common. Just get as close as you can. And once you're happy with it, you can take a 9/16. I'll snug everything down and then come back with our torque wrench and get it completely tightened. Now that everything is torqued down, make sure to go back. If you left any of those bracket bolts loose or zip ties loose from earlier, cinch those down and whatnot. And now we can run our airlines. They plug into the bag just like we showed you earlier. On the passenger side, you do want to make sure they give you this little heat sleeve, heat protector. Put that on the airline before you plug it into the bag. So I'll go ahead, get these routed, show you where they ended up. On the passenger side, how I routed this airline tube, I put this one in the frame rail just because the exhaust is so close. And I run it out to where it came out here. And I did take some wire loom, maybe a couple foot, put it on there just to help keep it protected. It is something you can grab separately if you want. But, you want to avoid hot moving parts, sharp bends, things like that. So zip tied it every now and again to keep it secure. Have it running over here. And it's a little tricky to see from the back side, but I did drill a hole in the side here underneath of our license plate lights and mounted them up. We'll check that out here in a minute. We'll show you where we routed the driver's side airline. So same deal, starting by our license plate light. Brought it up. And this one I didn't go through the frame. It's far enough away from the exhaust. You can just follow this factory wiring over to where it plugs into the top of the bag. Here's how I mounted up that fitting. I just drilled a hole a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch, put it through there, put the hardware on. Same deal for the driver's side one. And now at this point, we can put between 40 and 60 pounds of air in the bags. That way we can check for any clearance issues and leaks. So I sprayed everything down, checked for leaks, we're all good there. No clearance issues, so nothing to worry about as far as that goes. And what I'll do now, grab our spare tire, raise that back up into position. And with all that said, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs for the rear axle on our 2017 Ford F-150 Raptor.